Hey there everybody, welcome back to Tabletop Glory. My name is Graham Johnson, and today I'm kind of suffering from some burnout, so why don't we actually recharge those hobby batteries by doing something fun, like making some bases. And why don't we put ourselves a little bit of a challenge on it, and make those bases using as many 3D printed parts as I can get my hands on. Should be a lot of fun. Now, I didn't really have a major theme in mind for what we were going to be doing today. However, you'll notice that there is a heavy sea theme, and that is just because I realized I had so many 3D printed parts of like corals and shells and things like that. I thought it'd be really kind of neat to kind of workshop some of the deepkin ideas that I have. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Deepkin, that is a term used in Age of Sigmar from Games Workshop. That is their sea elves, and I really want to do a sea elf army at some point, and I really decided that maybe we could have a bit of fun right now and kind of knock out an idea for how I want to do the basing on those models, and to give me a really good understanding of how much of this stuff I'm going to need in the future when I'm ready to pull the trigger on that army. So in any case, to the bits box! For my first bits box, I'm kind of going through my basing box. This is pretty much anything I think will be good for a base. These huge round 3D printed bases are known as base toppers. If you're ever looking for stuff like this, a lot of the times if you type in base toppers, you'll find stuff like that. And it's really meant to just be glued down and replace the whole top of the base. I find that with the Games Workshop bases, a lot of times you gotta flip them over to get them so that you don't have to trim them down at all. But they work just fine, and I thought it'd be fun to paint one of those up initially, and then I had the idea for this aquatic theme that I ended up going with for the other two bases as I was going through my other bits and kind of figuring out what I had available from my 3D printed collection. And as I went through my 3D printed collection of bits, that was when I kind of had this idea of trying to limit myself to as many 3D printed parts as possible. I thought it'd be really fun to kind of see what you can make out of what's available for free online. In fact, pretty much all of the 3D printed stuff you're going to see in this video, I didn't pay for. I found it on Thingiverse. I knew it was going to be really important for this test base to really kind of fine-tune how I was going to add all these little bits of coral. And I came up with a conclusion of just gluing them all down where I wanted them and then putting the basing paste around it. Now, if you've ever really worked with GW basing paste or most brands of basing paste, they can be pretty thick. And when you thin them down before you add them to your miniature, it can kind of just get super runny and it doesn't really go where you want it to go, and it takes forever to dry, and then it doesn't always look right, and yada, yada, yada. So here's a solution that I found to this. Turns out that if you just wet down the area that you're having an issue with, you can push it down into position a lot better, and then you can soak up the water with a dry brush or a little bit of paper towel, and then you can use the excess water to clean off all the little bits on the base and make sure that that basing paste stays off of what you don't want it on. And this worked really great for kind of smoothing things out and putting those tiny little bits exactly where I wanted them, and even putting a little bit in that busted pot. I mean, it worked out really, really well. So yeah, keep some water on hand, keep it moving, and don't be afraid to get the base itself wet when you're trying to get everything where you want it, and then just soak the excess moisture off with some paper towel. When it comes to base toppers, they're pretty straightforward, and they honestly look great coming straight off the 3D printer, but a lot of times I like to add a little bit of basing paste to them just to kind of add some variety, but also because I'm not going to use these base toppers across the entire army. I'm going to use a lot of basing paste and maybe some cork and some other things like that, so it's important to go ahead and add a little bit of basing paste to these 3D printed bases in order to help them blend in with the rest of the army. Trust me, if you don't do this step and you just paint them and you mix and match them with other miniatures that don't have these base toppers, they do stick out like a sore thumb. And that's not always a bad thing, especially if you're using these on like your commanders and stuff. But in my personal opinion, I think it looks really nice when the whole army looks congruent, I guess is the right phrase, and it all just kind of blends in together and looks like it belongs. Now, I didn't really have a huge plan for this base. It was just a lot of bits that I've kind of always really liked but never really had an excuse to use, and I wanted to put them all together and make them feel like they belong. And this kind of feels somewhere between the Legend of Zelda Water Temple meets maybe Sands Before Time, some kind of Araby type setting for a tabletop game, maybe great for D&D, maybe some roguish type characters stealing that crystal. But yeah, I thought this would be really fun to kind of mock up and mount a miniature to it in the future. I've got a few that I think will work really nice with this base, and I was kind of planning around that, so you guys will have to keep an eye out for when we go ahead and reuse this down the road. But as you can see, very similarly to the first base, I'm kind of blending things in using this basing paste and kind of helping to hide where things don't really fit together quite well. If I had really sanded these down really flat on the bottoms, I probably could have glued them down pretty tight to the base and it wouldn't have made much of a difference. However, I feel like by adding the basing paste, I'm kind of blending everything together the way that I have. I feel it really makes everything feel whole. It really makes it feel like it's a part of the scene, and I think it really helps to kind of unite everything together and make it feel like it belongs. As for the paint job, I don't really do anything too crazy. The only thing I think I haven't covered on this channel before is something that I like to do with sand. I like to start with these earthy tones in the texture paints, and then I like to use a Shopty bone or other similar bone colors and water them down into a wash and kind of apply them haphazardly and kind of thickly. I feel like the combination of the two colors gives some realism to the sand without having to do a ton of dry brushing, and I think it looks really, really nice. Now, you're probably also going to notice that I'm using a lot of these earthy tones throughout everything, and that is because I am using a lot of contrast paints to bring various colors into this. Pretty much any of the baskets or woodwork, I'm going to be using my traditional go-to contrast colors of like Skeletal Horde and Gunther Fur and a few of those others to really kind of bring it into its own and kind of do a mishmash of colors to give the illusion that some of these wicker baskets are older than others and some are newer than others, and that way it really feels like these are offerings that have been brought over time. With other bases, I'm not going quite as crazy with them, and I'm just putting tons of washes on top of these earth colors. And for any of the stonework, I'm pretty much doing exactly as I always do in pretty much every video. If you want a little bit more in-depth on that, you can go ahead and check out the Eye Tyrant video I did. There's a whole video dedicated to just painting the base, and pretty much everything I'm doing here is a carbon copy of what I'm doing there. So if you want a more in-depth video and an actual tutorial, I highly recommend that you go and check out that video. For the Imperium base topper, I pretty much keep it pretty simple. I do a lot of grays and I dry brush a few different layers of gray, including a little bit more on the white side. And then I kind of hit it up with some rattling grime along the back to kind of make it look a little bit more like asphalt. And then I kind of hit up these cracks using some Skeleton Horde, and I keep it nice and thick. I think it does a really good job of kind of giving this aged look, as though maybe there was some kind of painted color or detail here at one point, and it's just faded to time, and now it's become just another part of the battlefield. Now, for as nice as the seaweed and the corals look, I didn't really do anything crazy. I actually just did a little bit of wet blending with contrast paints on the miniatures themselves, and then did some dry brushing. But I did selective dry brushing. I didn't dry brush everything. I only dry brushed a few things, and I didn't go crazy. I didn't go overboard. If you dry brush everything, it'll all kind of look samey, so pick out a few different corals and dry brush those, and then leave the rest of them dark. It'll really help things kind of look like there's some serious variety going on there. And then I'm also just using these same contrast paints for the bottles on the other base, as well as a nice deep blue for the crystal. And with that, we're pretty much done for today. It was a really fun project, kind of got the hobby juices flowing again, but I'm still feeling a little burnt out, and that's okay. Sometimes when we burn out on the hobby, the thing we need to do is to just take a break. I know a lot of people out there will say to just kind of push through the hobby burnout or to do something else within the hobby so you don't break your hobby streak, but sometimes you just gotta take a break, and that's okay. I'm sure I'll find something interesting for the next video to talk about, whether it's Dungeons & Dragons, Warhammer, or maybe we'll even finally start on one of the Gundams that's been behind me for a while now. In any case, I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of fun working on it. I'm going to have just as much fun sharing it with you. But in the meantime, let's check out the fruits of our labor and check out the final results. I actually had a lot of fun working on these guys, and yeah, there are some aspects of these where I could have taken them to an absolute extreme and gone crazy with the details, but honestly, I don't think they're needed. I think they work great the way they are, and I don't think they would distract from any miniatures that I stuck down on them. That's another real big thing to keep in mind when doing decorative bases like this, is it going to take away from the miniature that I put on it? And in the case of the underwater one, it actually might. But I think the other two work really well, and I think despite how much detail I've got on some of them, I think they're still going to work really nice for whatever I decide to use them for. In any case, I hope you guys found today's video interesting, and maybe I inspired you guys to do something similar. Now, I know not everybody really enjoys painting their miniatures, and not everybody enjoys building their miniatures, but I myself enjoy the whole process, and building bases like this kind of brings that into the base building for me. I really enjoy the whole process, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching my process. In any case, that's going to wrap things up for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. May your display case always be filled, and your pile of shame never run empty. Until next time.